Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is RepeatRun, and today we're going to be doing another Killing Floor 2 tier list. This is going to be going over all the weeklies since we haven't done that, and I figured it would be a lot of fun, especially since we just got a sneak peek of what the two new weeklies are going to be. I'm looking forward to playing them whenever we get the official beta out, which will probably be coming, I imagine, at the end of this month or the start of next month. Anyway, let's talk about the ones that we already have, and I'll be ranking these based on how difficult I believe that they are. So S is going to be the most difficult, D is going to be the least difficult. So our first one is Boom, a weekly that makes it so Zeds will explode upon death. This is set to the hard difficulty, so it's one of the lower difficulties, and you do have to get through 7 waves. Now, each enemy explodes differently. Smaller enemies will explode into just a smaller explosion similar to like a grenade or so, but then larger enemies such as flesh pounds and skrakes will blow up into much larger mushroom clouds, similar to Destroyer of Worlds that demo has. This one can be really annoying, especially if you're playing it on endless and you're playing on a high difficulty, because the explosions can deal tons of damage. This one's, I would say, is not one of the easiest ones, even though it is set on one of the lower difficulties, just because if you get close to Zeds, you can easily die. Classes that don't do well on this are things like mainly Berserker, but if you want to go with like a close range medic or a close range support, close range SWAT, close range just doesn't work very well. SWAT can kind of get away with it because you have all the armor that's going to be absorbing most of the damage until it starts touching health. So medic will do really well on this because you can sustain yourself. Demo can do pretty well on this because you have explosion resist. Survivalist can do pretty well on this because you also can have explosion resist at the level 20 perk. So you do have some options here, but this one is usually not one of the easiest to beat, and I would probably put Boom up into A tier because it can give you some real struggles. I don't think it would be quite S tier because it is set on hard. If this was set on Suicidal, it would definitely be S tier, or if it was set on Hell on Earth, it would absolutely be S tier. But thankfully it's only set to hard, so I think putting it in A tier is pretty fair. So with this one, I honestly don't think it's too bad, especially if you take a class that's good at hitting headshots or does a lot of damage with each of their guns. So if you play support, shotguns can rip through Zeds pretty easily because you can land all the pellets on a head. Sharpshooter and gunslinger get bonus headshot damage, so this one is pretty much made for them. Every other class does okay on it. I don't think you're going to run into any class that does extremely poor on it. This one, I believe, is also set to hard. I actually can't find a thing that tells me what this is actually set to. It's either hard or it's suicidal. Either way, it's not the worst weekly, and you do kind of get a cool skin with the center fire with this. So I would probably put this one into B tier. I think it's below Boom. I think Boom's more difficult and more annoying. This one isn't as frustrating, especially for a lot of the classes, because unless you're playing Firebug, headshots shouldn't be that difficult for you, and even if you are playing Firebug, now you have plenty of weapons. The first wave is going to be a little bit rough for you, but the Cock and Burn should let you get through it. After that, going with something like the Spitfires, Dragon's Breath, or saving up to like a Helios Rifle, you shouldn't have too much trouble hitting enemies in the head and just ripping them apart. That's about the only class I can think that wouldn't do incredibly well on this, because even Berserker can hit headshots, and if you want to take a real high damage weapon, it works just fine too here. Next up, we have Tiny Terror. Tiny Terror is set to Suicidal difficulty, and this one just makes it so the more you damage Zeds and the more Zeds damage you or teammates, the smaller you'll get and the smaller they'll get. This does have some interesting effects because it essentially works as a health bar, similar to how Commando can see enemies' health. This way you can see pretty much how close you are getting to killing an enemy. So this one is pretty much just like a straightforward game of Suicidal, especially if you can do high enough damage to one-shot Zeds, then them getting smaller doesn't really matter. If you can't do that, then it kind of does, so any class that does high amounts of damage does well here. And so long as you can keep track of where the Zeds are, you shouldn't have too much trouble. I know sometimes they can get kind of close to you and they're lower than you then. So something like a Siren could actually give you a lot of issues, or a Bloat could give you a lot of issues if it's allowed to get real close to you and you just don't notice it. But for the most part, I don't think Tiny Terror is any more difficult than just a regular Suicidal match. It's maybe slightly more difficult, but I would probably put this one on C tier. I think it's pretty manageable for most people. Next up, we got Bobble Zed. Bobble Zed is Suicidal as well. This is actually where they do have the huge head. So their health, the head health has been scaled up quite a bit, as well as so is the player's head health. So this one is just you have to deal high amounts of damage to the head. And any class that deals extra damage to heads will not have a problem with this, as well as any class that can just hit really hard, which is most of the classes now. So overall, this one's not that bad. It can be a bit annoying and you can run through bullets fairly easy with this one because enemies just have so much health. But if you're playing Sharpshooter, Gunslinger, Survivalist, anybody like that, you shouldn't have a problem with this one. I would put Cranium Cracker, I would put Bobble Zed probably up here with Cranium Cracker. Next up we have Poundamonium. Poundamonium makes it so that you are pretty much guaranteed to fight the King Flesh Pound at the end of this. You also have Flesh Pounds and Quarter Pounds much more likely to spawn in. This is 7 waves on Suicidal. Poundamonium can also be pretty difficult because you just have more Flesh Pounds showing up, and more Flesh Pounds usually give you more issues than most other Zeds do, unless you have a bunch of Raging Strikes or something, or maybe a Husk Wave. Those are about the only waves I could think that would be worse than Poundamonium. So Poundamonium can give you quite a few issues. If you're going with any sort of tank class, or if you're going with a really high damage to single target class, so if you're playing Sharpshooter or especially Demo in this mode, Survivalist, if you want to go with a tank class like Berserker or SWAT or Medic, you're usually okay with this. Certain classes don't do particularly well on Poundamonium. Generally the ones that are better against small and medium enemies, so Commando, Firebug, they might struggle on this one, but everybody can potentially struggle on this one because you can just get overwhelmed by Flesh Pounds and die. I would probably put this one into A tier as well with Boom. I'd put it lower than Boom though. Boom is more annoying to me than the Poundamonium is. Up next we have Up and Decay, which I believe is scaled to Suicidal as well. It could be hard difficulty though. This makes it so the more times you, or the more damage you inflict on enemy, as well as the more times you hit an enemy, the higher chance it has to just be swollen up and then fly up to the air and then explode. This is actually probably one of the easier modes, I would say, because even though it is on potentially Suicidal difficulty, so long as you can hit body shots, you should be doing fine, or if you can do consistent amount of damage. So things like Firebug's Fire can actually work quite well here. Sharpshooter, anybody that does high damage to any part of the Zed can kill them very quickly, as well as somebody like Support who doesn't even need to hit headshots, just body shots are usually enough to cause enemies to fly away. If you go with high damage weapons with somebody like Berserker, you shouldn't have any trouble either. And I would probably say this is one of the easier weeklies, so I'm going to put this one into D tier. Up next is Zed Time. Zed Time makes it so it's pretty much Zed Time all the time. This can be kind of annoying because you don't get, I don't think you get the level 25 perks from using it. You might, maybe I've just never done it as level 25 perk, but Zed Time going all the time isn't necessarily a great thing. It takes longer to kill enemies. This one can be more annoying. I find this one to be one of the most annoying weeklies just because it can take a while for you to actually win, and if you die and have to restart, it takes even longer. I think this is also one of the few weeklies that's scaled to Hell on Earth. Certain classes that work really well with this are usually a team or a well-rounded class that can deal with pretty much everything. Somebody like Berserker or Gunslinger or Survivalist. If you're playing this in multiplayer, then somebody like Firebug can be really useful for killing a lot of the smaller enemies, and then having somebody like Sharpshooter to kill the larger enemies. But in solo, those two aren't fantastic for killing everything. You can still definitely do it. I think I'd put Zed Time actually up into S tier. I think I'd put it on the low end of S tier, but just the time that it takes to go through it, and if you lose, you have to come back, just that amount of annoyingness just puts it above. And I think this is one of the few that's actually scaled to Hell on Earth. So it's one of the hardest difficulties. Up next we have Beefcake. Beefcake is 7 wave Suicidal. This just makes it so if Zeds hit you or hit an ally of any sort, then they get stronger. They get more health from that. This one's pretty manageable too, I would say. So long as somebody's not getting mauled to death by certain enemies, you should be fine. Some of the enemies can hit you easier than others. Something like Stalkers or Crawlers or even Sirens can hit you fairly easy, whereas things like Bloats shouldn't be able to hit you as easily. So if you can take out the quicker enemies first, you shouldn't have too many problems dealing with the larger, slower enemies. I would probably put Beefcake somewhere into B tier, maybe above Bobble Zed. Alright, up next we have Bloodthirst, which Bloodthirst I think is probably one of the harder weeklies to do. This is scaled to 7 wave Suicidal, but every time that you're not killing enemies, you are taking damage over time. And every time you kill an enemy, you'll be getting health back based on whichever type of enemy you killed. So it prioritizes you killing things quickly, which can be difficult on certain maps, and it can be difficult in a team because if somebody's killing a lot of stuff and you're just draining health, you can die pretty quick. You also can't heal yourself, but damage reduction perks do help with this. So taking Resilience with Medic, you'll actually be taking less damage over time, as well as if you go with Dreadnought with Berserker, you'll have double health anyway, and it will have to take down your health at a normal rate. So you'll have twice as much time to kill enemies then. But I would still probably put Bloodthirst up into S tier. It's probably one of the hardest weeklies to complete. Up next we have Coliseum. This is another Hell on Earth scaled event, and this one's also 7 waves. Now for this one, whenever you trigger Z time, you also get the skill battering ram that SWAT has. So you can take off running at normal speed and knock enemies down, dealing high damage to them. You also can only play this as Berserker, and you can only play with melee weapons. So if you're very unfamiliar with playing Berserker, or if you're very new to Berserker, this one is probably going to be the most difficult for you, since Berserker plays a bit different than other classes. You do have to get kind of used to being able to block and parry. I did do a guide on this specific one, and you are still allowed to take the Hemoclobber, which I would definitely recommend you take. But this one is probably one of the hardest ones too, just because it's so restrictive and you are playing on Hell on Earth. I would put Coliseum probably on the low side of S tier as well, similar to Z time. Up next we have Arachnophobia. This one's also set to Suicidal 7 waves. This one makes it so crawlers are much more likely to spawn, as well as they are far tankier. However, if you jump on top of them, you're pretty much guaranteed to kill them. And if you keep jumping on enemies, you will build up a combo that deals even more damage with each enemy you step on. This one I found isn't too bad in most maps. So long as you're used to jumping onto the crawlers, it's not that bad. You can kill every other Zed the same way you normally would. And since there's more crawlers, you kind of know what's going to be coming. You can also kill the crawlers just by dealing high damage to them. I found that Firebug can kill them very fast, just like they always can. So you could just do that if you don't really want to try jumping on them. Also, you probably shouldn't try this on the moon base, because moon base messes with your gravity. And I found it takes much longer to do this on the moon base, and at least for me, it's a bit more inconsistent on the moon base, since you have so much more control with the jumps. So if you're used to Suicidal, this one probably won't be too bad, and I would probably put this one into C tier. I believe that everybody can probably do Arachnophobia. And then our last weekly, at least as of right now, is Scavenger. This one is set to hard on 7 waves, so it is one of the lower difficulties. And this one makes it so you can't buy any sort of weapons or any grenade. Oh no, you can buy grenades. You just can't buy any weapons at all. You can buy grenades and armor at any of the dealers, but everything else you just have to find on the ground, and stronger and stronger weapons will be spawning as the match goes on. This one is pretty much made for the survivalist, and if you're like me and really like survivalists, then this one is probably one of the easiest and one of the most fun weeklies to do. You could also do very well if you're playing something like Medic. You can do well with really any of the classes, as long as you're willing to adapt and take whatever weapons you can find. I think that this one is super fun, and I find that it's not that difficult either. I kind of wish it was a bit more difficult, or it was its own scaling mode or something. But as of right now, this one is probably D tier. I would put it above Up, and Decay. It's a bit more difficult because you do have to be kind of used to just grabbing whatever weapons and going. So thank you guys so very much for watching this. I really do appreciate that. If you enjoyed this video, be sure that you subscribe. That way you get notifications whenever I post these. Special thanks to all of the supporters of the channel. I really do appreciate all the support. These are my patrons as well as my YouTube members. There are links in the description if you would like to become part of either of those. You get early access to videos like this one, as well as if you'd like to see my other Killing Floor content and tier lists and everything like that, check over here on this video. That'll take you to a playlist full of them. Thanks everybody. Hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you later. Bye!